Hey, and welcome to the Bossed Up Podcast, episode 503. I'm your host, Emily Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up. And today I want to talk about pivoting from the public to the private sector. This is particularly top of mind because just last month, in March of 2025, we saw layoffs surge led by the public sector. This is thanks largely to Elon Musk and his ad hoc team known as DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, which led the amount of layoffs last month with more than 216,000 government employees who were fired from their jobs. This is according to outplacement firm Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. So 216,000 government employees got their pink slip last month. And there are massive concerns about possible recession or other layoffs and just market volatility to follow as part of the current administration's uncertainty when it comes to things like international trade and domestic economic policy. So today's episode is for you if you were among those 216,000 employees that the government just axed, or for someone you know and love who might benefit from listening to this episode. Because no matter how noble and respected and important I feel that government servants are, that public service careers truly are, this might be not a great time to pivot from one public sector position to the next. Even though you've got options, we all know that there are public sector roles on the city and municipal and county and state levels that might be a better option than the federal government right now. But if you are sick of being, frankly, maligned in the press and called government waste, and the jokes around government inefficiency feel very much at your expense, I don't blame you one bit if you are looking at how green the grass might be on the other side in the private sector. So today's episode is going to get into a few practical tips for how to recharacterize your experience to make that job search and make that transition from the public to the private sector as seamless as possible. The first thing you're going to need to do is learn the lingo. I need you to deeply understand the vernacular used by professionals in your target industry. Now, this is true for anyone, but it's particularly relevant for those who are recharacterizing and describing their past experiences in the public sector in a way that the private sector can value and understand. For instance, if you've been working in workforce development, you might be able to realistically and honestly recharacterize that work as focusing on things like talent development or employee development or learning and development. Workforce development and all those other kinds of developments are not that different at the end of the day. So, thinking about how you might describe, and in the public sector, you might describe things like career coaching and leadership development differently than in the private sector. That'll help you figure out which jobs to target in the private sector and how you might need to rewrite your resume without exaggeration, without bluster, without just lying on your resume, but actually using the language of your target industry can really help make those connections between your past and the career that you want for your future. So again, if you've been focusing on things like constituent services, you might need to lean into those customer service skills. If you've been driving impact or focusing on compliance in your government sector role, you might need to be able to describe how you would drive revenue or drive growth in a private sector role instead. One of the best ways to learn the lingo of your target audience is to read a ton of job descriptions. So remove the geographic filters so you can read as many job descriptions that are actively hiring, even if they're hiring in geographic regions you don't want to move to. Your goal in doing so is just to get as much insight into how they're using language to describe the target skills that they're looking for so you can better align your past experiences with the language that will land you those kinds of positions. Another way to do this effectively is to have as many conversations as you can with active practitioners in your target industry. So grab a cup of coffee or conduct an online informational interview if need be to listen actively to how those practitioners describe their skills and the work at hand. You can also send them your resume or your LinkedIn profile to ask them to take a look and make sure the language you're using to describe your skills lands with them and their audience. When making the transition from the public to the private sector, you've got to emphasize your transferable skills. So lean into those soft skills that will be relevant in either sector, things like project management, program management, or people management. Emphasize your leadership skills and how you brought them to the table in the public sector because they absolutely transfer over into how you can be successful in the private sector. And the same could be said for your more technical skills as well. Did you do work like data analysis and data visualization? If so, connect those past skills and experiences to how you would drive revenue and growth in the private sector roles that you're applying for. I offer a great free workshop on how to do this effectively using something known as the CAR method, which is an acronym that stands for challenge, action, and results. It's all about telling the full story about how your past experiences would transfer into future success in the role. You can get on demand access now to my free masterclass, How to Confidently Communicate Your Skills in the Job Search, via today's show notes. When making your case as a public servant to transition into the private sector, don't hide your past experiences, but frame them as a value add. Frame your public service as an asset to this private company's success in the future. In other words, don't try to hide it or deny it. Make your past experience work for you. For starters, think about the kinds of companies that would find your expertise in government valuable to them navigating the public policy landscape or keeping up with the latest compliance or even just navigating public private relationships or public private partnerships. Think about all the private companies you may have interfaced with as a public sector employee through the vendors that our government works with. Those are the kinds of private sector companies that will find people with past experience in government to be particularly valuable. So try to make that an asset that you bring to the table by focusing on companies who are directly impacted by the public policy landscape and therefore would find your skills and experience in the public sector valuable to their business's bottom line. It's not always possible depending on the role that you're applying for, but whenever you can, characterize your public sector experience as a strength, not a deficit. My final tip for navigating a career transition from the public to private sector is to tighten up your resume. That 10-page resume may have been okay for the government sector and for applying to jobs via USA Jobs, but that is not the norm in the private sector. You're going to want to cull back and be selective about the experiences you share that are particularly relevant to the role. These days, you're going to want to aim for a 1 to 2 page resume for the private sector, tops, maybe 3 if it feels particularly relevant and worthwhile. But unless you're applying to the higher education space, which normalizes longer CVs, much like the government space does, you're going to want to keep it concise, keep it brief, keep it tight, and really focus on what's relevant and transferable and cut the rest. I know that can be hard to do, so I've dropped links in today's show notes to a few relevant podcast episodes. One on how to format your resume for the modern job search, and another on 4 resume rules that no longer apply in the modern era. So we've got tons more resources for you on crafting your resume for the modern job search, particularly on how to make that transition from one industry to the next. You can find links to all the past episodes and resources, including that free masterclass that I mentioned, in today's show notes and corresponding blog post at bossedup.org/episode 503. And as always, I want to hear from you. Let's keep the conversation going after the episode in the Bossed Up Courage community on Facebook or in our Bossed Up group on LinkedIn. I want to learn if you've successfully navigated a pivot from the public to the private sector. What worked best for you? What might you add to today's episode that I didn't cover? And if you were one of the hundreds of thousands of people who found themselves laid off from their public sector job last month, what is the market like for you right now? We want to hear from you, and we're here to support you in making sure that you stick your landing like a boss. And as always, let's keep bossing in pursuit of our purpose. And together, let's lift as we climb.